Good morning and welcome to the second day of the JP Morgan Autos Conference. My name is Bill Peterson, U.S. CleanTech analyst, and really pleased to have Thomas Healy, the CEO of Hyliion here. He's going to walk us through a presentation, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session. If anybody has any questions, we'll certainly be willing to take those, ask you to wait for the microphone. But Thomas, thanks for joining the conference, and over to you.
Thanks for having us here, and good morning, everyone. So to start things off, my name's Thomas. I'm the founder and CEO of Hyliion. In case any of you aren't familiar with our organization, I'll give a kind of brief overview here. So we're headquartered down in Austin, Texas. Our mission is to electrify the commercial vehicle space. Now, in order to do that, we actually have two different product lines. Our first is the Hypertruck product line, which is an electrified powertrain solution, specifically a range extender electric solution. We'll talk a lot more on that, as well as our Carno technology, which is a stationary or on-vehicle power generator. And so our whole focus and why I started Hyliion is we want to reduce the emissions, we want to bring forward lower cost of operating solutions, as well as we want to leverage the existing infrastructure. Throughout yesterday, today, if you sit in on other companies that are working on electrifying this space, you're going to hear the theme of infrastructure is probably their number one issue as people try to adopt or deploy vehicles. So this is how we see the electrification space shaping up. And so the first is everyone talks about plug-in electric vehicles, but plug-in vehicles have a lot of hurdles, right? Battery range, battery weight, how long does it take to recharge these vehicles? Those are all things that really are hindering adoption. So from that standpoint, we see the market breaking into two. You're going to have BEV plug-in vehicles that make sense for the short haul, final mile, local delivery applications. And then for the long haul space, you're going to want to use a electric range extender vehicle, which basically means it's a vehicle that has a battery pack, has e-axles. It drives purely off those batteries until it gets to a point where the battery charge gets low, and then it kicks a generator on to recharge those batteries as you're driving. Now, everyone often talks about fuel cell vehicles, and fuel cells are electric range extenders, right? So our thoughts are hydrogen is the fuel of the future, but the question is, how long is it going to take to be adopted? So from that standpoint, what we're doing is we're actually starting with renewable natural gas or natural gas as the fuel today to recharge those batteries, and then evolve into hydrogen and into a fuel cell as we go forward. And that kind of shapes up the slide here, where you can see we've got the electric range extender platform. Starting on the left, the ERX is the natural gas variant. Then we have a Carno variant, which is that generator that I was mentioning before. Fuel cell variant, which we have a partnership with Hyliion. That vehicle is actually up and running right now. And then the other thing we wanted to just showcase is this platform is not all that different than what a BEV platform is, right? You increase the size of the batteries, you remove the generator, and now you have a BEV plug-in architecture. So what we've done is we've developed the powertrain. So we do all the integration of the e-axles, the batteries, the controls. We do that integration, and then we work with the OEMs to integrate it into their vehicles. So one of the big clarifying statements is we're not a vehicle maker. We don't want to be a vehicle maker. We think the OEMs already do a great job of making trucks. Our goal is to be a powertrain provider. So this is a quick snapshot of what are the different solutions that fleets are faced with, and how do they pan out from an infrastructure cost emission standpoint. So you can see we've got the diesel comparison on the left, and then you have hydrogen, BEV plug-in, and the Hypertruck ERX running on natural gas. So when you look at cost, the Hypertruck ERX comes in significantly less than others. That's because when you go buy natural gas at a station today, you can usually buy it for around $1 to $1.50 a gallon. Versus you see hydrogen is a lot more expensive today, but going back to that roadmap, we see that hydrogen prices will come down over time to be more cost competitive. From an emissions standpoint, since you can use renewable natural gas, you actually have the ability to be net carbon negative. And then from a range standpoint, you would only need to stop once along that journey with the Hypertruck ERX. Same with a diesel vehicle versus a BEV plug-in, you would need about 7 stops along that journey. And then from a station standpoint, one of the things that's often unknown about the natural gas industry is there are already 700 stations already built out in existence for semi-truck refueling, public stations, about 700 of them, versus when you look at BEV plug-in, fuel cell, hydrogen, those stations are just starting to get built right now. All right, now that was kind of the overview on powertrain. Now let's shift to the KARNO generator. So this is a technology that we acquired out of GE, specifically their aviation division, an additive division, about a year ago. So this is a linear heat generator. So take everything you know about internal combustion engines and kind of push that to the side. This operates in a way where we actually still use conventional fuels, or a fuel like hydrogen or natural gas, propane. And what it does is that fuel produces heat, and then we're able to take that heat to extract electricity out of it and use that to either power a vehicle or use it to produce stationary power. So we can use it as a generator that could charge EVs. We can, be the power provider behind the EV chargers needed. We could power electricity at facilities, at buildings. And you can see along the bottom why we see this as such an innovative solution. So the first is it's scalable. You can see it's designed in these cylinder setups, these shafts. Well, you can continue to stack those shafts together to produce more power. So on a vehicle, we would need a 200 kilowatt generator, but maybe you want to power a whole hospital or many, many homes. Well, you could actually produce a couple of megawatts of power and do that in a footprint that's about the size of a 20-foot shipping container. It is fuel agnostic, so it truly fuel agnostic as well. That you might hear others talk about having a fuel agnostic platform, and what they often mean with an internal combustion engine is some of the parts stay the same, but then they change others like the pistons, the heads, and then they can be fuel agnostic. With the KARNO, this thing is truly fuel agnostic. You can go from 1 minute running on hydrogen to the next running on nat gas to the next running on a 50-50, a 70-30 ratio of these different fuels. So the fuels that it can run on, it's a wide variety. You've got diesel, propane, nat gas, ammonia, hydrogen, dimethyl ether, jet fuel. Truly, the list goes on. And it really gives fleet flexibility to say, hey, I can use fuels that are available today, but I'm also future-proof to use fuels that might become available in the future. Efficiency-wise, we can actually produce electricity out of this generator that rivals efficiencies of many of the power plants that are out there today, if not in some instances even better than a lot of the power plants out there. And then reduced emissions. We can run on fuels like ammonia and hydrogen that have zero carbon emissions. But then when you compare us to other solutions like diesel engine or natural gas engine, we actually expect to, with natural gas, be able to pass the future CARB mandates without having any after treatment system on the vehicle at all, which could be a huge win. So stationary power is another place, and actually where we first plan on delivering this solution. The reason for that is just because validation and integration work of putting it on a vehicle is pretty extensive versus stationary is a faster path to market, as well as just the regulatory side of things. To certify a vehicle, it takes years versus certify stationary power, it takes months. So we'll start deliveries of these solutions next year in 2024. That image that you see on the slide is a representation of what a 200 kilowatt generator would look like. Now, to kind of frame up what 200 kilowatts means, it's we've got a 120,000 square foot facility in Austin. That's our headquarters. One of those modules, one 200 kilowatt module, could power that entire facility. As you think about EV charging, that could usually charge about two charging pedestals or two charging ports. So there's then, when you think about the EV space, you could either put these together in a bank to then provide power to a bunch of EV chargers, or you could actually deploy a KARNO per charging pedestal. So it offers a lot of flexibility to the EV charging space, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but they're struggling to find electricity right now. So, and then this is just the last quick snapshot of how the KARNO works. You can see it on the bottom. It's a linear generator system, so that the way it works is you've got a rod setup that moves back and forth, left and right, and then an electric motor in the middle that produces electricity. But that movement is purely driven by heat. So there's no longer an internal combustion. What we do is we heat up a working gas, and when gas gets hot, it expands. and then that pushes the piston one way. Then you do the opposite reaction on the other side to push it back, and that's how you produce electricity. So that's kind of the quick overview snapshot on the company. The last thing I'll mention is just a quick journey of how we got to where we are today and what the path forward is. So took the company public back in 2020. We were part of the de-SPAC group. And then, as we look at where we sit today, we've got, we just announced earnings yesterday, about $350 million of cash on the balance sheet when we closed out Q2. And so we are still very well positioned from a cash standpoint. We expect to burn about $150 million this year. And when I say we're very well positioned, most of our competitors or peer sets are presently out on the market trying to raise capital. I actually started off earnings yesterday with just a little state of the industry of, look, there's some big headwinds out there. We've seen multiple bankruptcies. We saw a bankruptcy just on, I think it was Monday of this week with Proterra. We've seen ELMS, Lordstown. So there's some big challenges that groups are facing to try to electrify this automotive sector or commercial vehicle sector. But we believe, our cash is one of the things that we have that's a big differentiator for us. And management's commitment on earnings yesterday was, look, we're going to make sure we use this wisely. We make sure we continue to adjust and pivot our strategy as we go forward in order to best utilize our cash position to return shareholder value. So I'll pause there.
No, that was a great overview. Okay, so maybe you had a slide in here, but I want to kind of make it just clear for the audience. So the industry challenges, BEVs, obviously, a lot of it has to do with, battery costs and weight. Utilization, you pointed out, fuel cell, maybe more related to hydrogen infrastructure, maybe cost as well, that needs to come down. Where does your solution, especially the nat gas solution, fit in the spectrum of this low emission strategy? Especially because it's not zero emission. So if people really want zero emission, it's not there yet. But maybe just quickly describe the industry challenges and how you feel that the nat gas would be a good kind of intermediate step on the path.
Sure. So 2 years ago, I think the industry is looking at saying, hey, there's so much tailwind behind electrification, so much discussion. I'm going to adopt it. I need to be a part of this. The market, the financial landscape has obviously shifted drastically over the last couple of years. And now fleets are pulling back and saying, I'm going to adopt solutions that I need to. That's really driven by a regulatory standpoint. So when you think about CARB, they've got a few different mandates. They've got ACF, ACT.
CARB, for the audience, the California Air Resource Board.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep. So these are mandates that are being put on the OEMs, on the fleets, that say you need to be shipping or adopting electric vehicles. So Hyliion's natural gas range extender solution can qualify very similarly, if not identical, to what a BEV or a fuel cell vehicle can qualify for. So you mentioned challenges, right? Cost is number one. You look at setting up charging infrastructure. On average, it costs about 1.5 times the cost of the vehicle to actually set up the infrastructure to be able to recharge it. So that's a big hurdle for fleets. You look at hydrogen. One of the problems is infrastructure doesn't exist today. So there's only about, I think, 3 hydrogen refueling stations in the U.S. for semi-trucks, all in California. And so, if a fleet wants to move to hydrogen, they need to figure out how do you refuel it. There's an example out there of a fleet tried a hydrogen fuel cell truck in Houston. There's no refueling, right? So it became a mess. They had to truck in hydrogen in order to refuel this vehicle. They were spending about $200 a kilogram to get that hydrogen into the truck, right? To put that into perspective, that's about $200 a gallon of diesel fuel, is to put apples to apples comparison. So that obviously doesn't make sense, but that goes back to, you got to be practical, right? Don't deploy a fuel cell vehicle in Houston if there's no hydrogen available, right? So that's where natural gas, low cost infrastructure is out there. Make it easier for fleets to adopt electric by leveraging the existing infrastructure that's there.
How many? Maybe that's a good point. How many pumps are available now for gas in the U.S. these days?
Yeah. So there's about 700 stations, 650 to 700 public stations. You compare that to public BEV semi-truck refueling, recharging, there's about 4. Hydrogen, there's about 3. So nat gas just has a big advantage. The infrastructure is built out about a decade ago.
I want to talk about policy, but I want to maybe kind of take a step back. So not talking about Carno because there's obviously IP there, but what is the core IP of the company as it relates to, batteries, powertrain? What are you doing in-house? What are you doing externally? And, really what is the kind of key sort of modes as you see it as your IP?
Sure. So integration and software. So we took a pretty similar approach to how Tesla got started, where they looked and they said, hey, if we can buy components off the shelf and then be the integrator of those, and then as we go forward, we'll start to vertically integrate ourselves and we'll take over components like the motors and the axles and things like that. That's how Tesla went to market. We're taking a similar approach where all of the software, that's probably our biggest competitive differentiation. All the vehicle control, or powertrain control, all the cloud-based integration, the gateway on the vehicle, that is all designed, developed, and owned by Hyliion. And then we're sourcing components like a Meritor e-axle, we're sourcing a Cummins engine, we're sourcing batteries that are already, modules that are made, but then we do the pack integration. But as we go forward, it gives us the ability to look at how do we, vertically integrate ourselves to grow our product offering. Mm-hmm.
So kind of on the near term, the company's announced plans to deliver 30 trucks to launch customers, and it's, you have the founders program. Help us try to understand the price of this on these types of trucks, maybe today and long term, and how does that compare to a diesel? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about cost of ownership. So how should we think about the price of the vehicle? And I mean, there obviously is a fuel component as well here.
Yeah. So I'll give you a few different stats on this. So price of our truck with the powertrain and everything is about $400,000, just under $400,000. These numbers I'm going to quote include the IRA benefit, the $40,000 benefit. So we're at about just under $400,000. A BEV truck is about $450,000. A fuel cell truck is about between $500,000 and $600,000. And then a diesel truck is now approaching $200,000. So we're about double the cost of a diesel. Fuel cells about triple. BEVs a little bit more than double. But then it really comes back to what you just mentioned of the fuel cost, right? So a fleet is willing to pay more upfront as long as they see a way to give an overall payback or overall positive TCO on the vehicle. And that's where natural gas really shines, right? Because you can buy nat gas at $1 to $1.50 a gallon, about a third, a quarter of what diesel fuel costs, and can offer that positive payback. Unfortunately, BEV operating costs, because the cost of electricity is very similar to the cost of diesel fuel, and then fuel cell right now, hydrogen is about double the cost of diesel.
Yeah, but how to think about this long term? If you were to have a nat gas generator, 5 years from now at scale, what can that cost and price structure look like?
Yeah, so one of the things, actually, we touched a little on this on earnings, which is our expectation is that as electrification volume grows, not just with Hyliion, but across the sector, that will hopefully, increase volume of components, which then naturally we would look to be able to reduce the cost of systems overall. So I think everyone is skeptical to guess as to what that pricing is going to be in the future, because when people were guessing a couple of years ago as to what they thought the cost would be today, everyone was drastically off.
Pretty big inflation, right?
Diesel trucks, for instance, went from about $130,000 a truck to about $200,000 a truck in the course of a couple of years here, so a few years. So I'm going to hold off on guessing on the pricing, but we do think
but there's some cost down opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, naturally at scale, which is the most important thing.
Suppliers are trying to recoup their R&D costs right now.
Yeah. There's been a lot of excitement about low and zero emission vehicles, but the amount of adoption is actually, especially in heavy duty space, is really actually pretty low and lower than what we thought maybe a couple of years back. So why is that? What's been keeping these sort of commitments on taking on vehicles? What's holding it back? And even in your case, in the ERX, what's holding back volumes at this stage?
Sure. So, if you think about how much buzz there is about electrifying the trucking space, you would think there are tens of thousands of vehicles out there, right? The reality is there are hundreds of trucks out on the road right now that are electric in the Class 8 space. So you're right, you're spot on, Bill. And I think what has driven this is, frankly, the suppliers like Hyliion haven't had vehicles that are ready, right? If we wouldn't be ready to go into mass production right this instant, right? Our suppliers are still working on final validation of their components, scaling up and everything. But then the other thing that has been a shift over the last year or two is fleets have become much, much more cash conscious and looking at what's the payback, what's the ROI on these vehicles. And, when a fleet, I'll give you an example of a fleet in Texas was planning on adopting 50 BEV plug-in trucks, and they got quoted $30 million to set up charging infrastructure. And they paused the whole project right there, right? They can't incur that sort of a cost. So these hurdles that we mentioned are real, and it's really pushing back on adoption. And the government incentives that are out there don't overcome this, right? A lot of people think, oh, you can buy this stuff at the same cost of a diesel. You can't. An interesting thing is the IRA tax, the IRA benefit is basically equal to the standard FET taxes that are put on this vehicle. So, I mean, it's basically like you're getting a tax incentive that's all it's doing is it's offsetting the tax that is being put on the truck anyways. So it's not making it at cost parity as a diesel.
But let's at least think about policy support. And there's kind of two forms, right? There's carrots and sticks, and there's federal and state. So I guess, can you summarize the benefits? Because this is an important thing to start. And California is probably a case study, especially with the advanced clean fleets, on why there should be some adoption here in the relatively near term, just because they're going to have to. Mm-hmm. So maybe, for those less familiar, can you summarize the benefits, maybe to the industry, but also for Hyliion as it relates to federal and state, especially California, but even some other states have programs too?
Sure. So let's start with the incentives first, right? So there's the IRA, $40,000. There is HVIP out in California, which can be for a BEV. I think it's about $120,000 for a fuel cell. I think it's $240,000.
It's double, yeah.
And that I think is expected to run out in the next year or two. But then there's a lot of discussion: does that get re-upped? And then those are really, and then there's other state incentive programs. There's or even federal DERA, TERP, which have discussions of, hey, we could subsidize up to 45% or up to 80% of the cost of vehicles, but we need to really look at the emissions benefits, and it's an application process. So it's not like IRA where it's just kind of, hey, if your vehicle is this, you get it. TERP, DERA, you need to apply for it. And then I think the mandates is what the industry is probably most concerned about, right? Which is CARB, California Air Resource Board, is saying, for OEMs starting in 2024, if you sell diesel trucks into California, you also now need to sell a certain percentage of electric or ZEV qualifying vehicles. Starting in 24, it's at 5% of the number of diesel trucks you sell now need to be electric. I think then it goes to 7, then 10. I mean, it climbs up over the years ahead. But then the other one is ACF, which is now the mandate on the fleets that says, starting in 2027, 10% of the trucks you operate in California need to be electric or ZEV credit generating. And if you don't hit that, you can only buy electric trucks in California until you get to that number, right? So this is a pretty strong forcing function to make fleets adopt electric vehicles.
And how does that inform Hyliion? I think you have a day cab now. So how does that kind of fit into what your response is and how you can kind of fit into this program?
Yeah, so we see these as one of the strongest levers for adoption are these new mandates coming out. So one of the reasons why we designed our truck, our Hypertruck ERX has 1,000 miles of range overall. One of the reasons why it has 75 miles of BEV or battery electric only range is because of the OEM or the ACT mandate. From an ACF standpoint, as Bill just mentioned, one of the things that they've done is they're saying, hey, we're going to mandate day cab before sleeper cab. So we just added to our product roadmap a day cab solution. So very responsive to the government mandates that are coming out, because that's the big pain point in front of fleets right now. And frankly, they don't know how to do it. There's so much pushback that CARB is getting right now from these fleets saying this isn't practical, we don't know how to do it. So that's where we see Hyliion's position well, where, hey, we can actually deliver you a solution that economically makes sense and it allows you to obtain these government credits or the mandates.
And how should we think about the timing of that program? I mean, I'm sure you can do a lot of learnings from from the full scale vehicle, but how should we think about when that can come to market?
Yes. So ACT starts next year. ACF starts in 27, and then we plan on having our day cab variant, which is kind of focused towards ACF, available, or the integration of the powertrain done in 25. So it gives fleets a little bit of a heads up or ability to start adopting before the mandate actually comes in place.
Yep. I want to pivot to Carno in a moment, but I want to see if anybody has any questions before pivoting. All right. So
it's a complex trucking industry out there, but electrification is coming.
Yeah. No, it's a good summary. So, Carno is interesting. You acquired this, and it wasn't actually a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. And, when I was thinking about it, like, if it's that great, like, why is it that inexpensive? So I'm still having a hard time squaring that circle, to be honest. But, you talked about how it can be introduced as a sort of a generator akin to what you're doing now. But, they also have the stationary. So I'd like to kind of dive into this a bit more. So what was the rationale for purchasing this as a starting point? Like, maybe, it'd probably be good to go ahead and show that slide.
Yeah. So reason for purchasing this. So as mentioned before, but those who recently joined, we acquired this out of GE, specifically their aviation and additive business. But we had been working with GE for a couple of years, a year and a half prior to actually the acquisition, and we had an agreement in place where we were working together to put this Carno generator in a truck, and we were very impressed with the development, how it was going, and so we were looking for ways to figure out how we could get more ownership as opposed to just be a purchaser of the Carno out of GE. And as I'm sure almost all of you are aware, GE is going through a divestiture right now. They're breaking into 3 companies, and so the Carno came up for sale as they were going through that, or as they are going through that. And so we jumped in quickly and offered to purchase it. And then we saw this as a way to not only put it into vehicles, but also put it into stationary power. And if you think about generators, right? Almost everyone views or thinks of a generator as the emergency the Generac model, right? Hey, I got this generator outside my house. It's going to turn on 3 times a year when my power goes down. Maybe I'll get 20 hours of operation out of it in a year, but you're willing to pay the money to put that generator out there because when your power does go down, it's a lifesaver, right? The Carno, think about it a little bit differently. This is now a generator where if you own it, you want to run it 24/7. It's extremely low maintenance. There's no oil. There's no lubricants in it. The thing likes to run, and if you look at the average price of natural gas that you could run this on in the U.S., we can produce electricity for in the 7 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour range. Now, if you compare that against grid electricity, what's California? Right? Yeah, what do you pay for electricity? Is it too much? Is it in the 30s?
It depends on time of day. But
okay,
yeah.
All right.
You don't run our washer and dishwasher. It's between 4 and 9. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So now if you own a Carno or you have a Carno, you want to run this 24/7, and you want it to be your primary power source for your facility, your chargers, and then you use the grid as your backup power source. You kind of shift the model.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's think about, truck aside here, when can this business start? And I guess, first of all, maybe back up. What's your go-to-market strategy? Are you talking to charging companies or you had that, you talked about maybe charging infrastructure being a kind of a key use case. How does that evolve? And when could that happen? Who are you working with? Do you have like distribution partners or other partners that have more expertise in this type of space? Help us understand, the opportunity here.
So we're in the middle of setting all that up right now. We plan on initial deployments in 2024 in the stationary market. So there are things, customers, we're in discussions right now. We need to lock them in. Distribution, all that needs to still be set up. These early units, we'll be producing the whole box and delivering it to customers. But as we go forward, market opportunity wise, you have the U.S. Obviously, you also have an international space. You have different use cases like EV charging, peak power shaving, right? So you're 4 to 9 p.m.
4 to 9 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah. What if we could have a Carno there that kicks on, and now you don't have that peak, those peak charges. You have renewables matching, right? Everyone loves wind and solar, but the reality is wind and solar doesn't always produce electricity, right? And so you could have a Carno sitting there that when you aren't producing wind and solar power, the Carno could offset that. A lot of people are trying batteries for that market. Batteries are super expensive still to be able to do that. So there's a lot of different use cases, but I think it's a paradigm shift to the way people think of generators, because normally it's like generators are notorious massive amounts of maintenance, right? That's why people don't buy generators and run facilities off of them, because you actually there's a story, I can't share who it was, but they were saying they outpaced the electricity they were using in their manufacturing plant, and so they brought in I think it was 4 or 5 stationary power generators to put outside their facility to power it off of. They said that every day or every other day there was a technician there working on an internal combustion engine, doing something to it, right, just to keep it up and running. The goal with this is it's deploy it and you're pretty much hands off and just let it run.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to be looking at tracks. So some time ago, you've always announced that you're going to have a fuel cell variant. You've announced Hyliion would be your partner in that. So what's the status of the demonstration you're doing right now? You spoke to it a bit earlier, but how should we think about that program? I know you've always said that it's going to be, some time away because of the lack of infrastructure, but how's the integration coming along, and how should we think about that program?
So a few things there. So one is what we've done is we've taken our powertrain, removed the natural gas engine, and effectively slotted in a fuel cell. And we designed the powertrain from day one with that architecture in mind. And so we teamed up with Hyliion. They've recently announced a 200 kilowatt fuel cell. I think Parker is going to be speaking here in an hour or two, so I'd encourage you guys to listen in on that. But they got their 200 kilowatt fuel cell stack. We use that. Use their tanks as well on the vehicle for storing hydrogen, and then the rest of the powertrain is Hyliion's. That vehicle, the first demonstration vehicle, just a few weeks ago, we actually got it up and running. It's now running on a test track. And the goal that Hyliion and Hyliion have teamed up on is by end of year, let's get this thing ready, fully ready to go from being able to do demos and showcases standpoint. Then what we want to do is bring it out to fleets and get feedback from them, right? Let them actually see that hydrogen fuel cell vehicle up front, and then look to determine with Hyliion how do we go from there towards a potential commercialization of that solution. But we really want to get it in front of customers and get the feedback first.
Makes sense. And maybe sort of tying in fuel cell, Carno, and nat gas, how much is similar? And obviously the generator itself is different, but how much can you take from your early learnings when you're applying Carno, when you're applying fuel cell?
Yeah, a significant amount of it. And you can kind of see it on this slide where the axles, the batteries, the thermal systems, and then one thing that you don't see is all the software, the integration, the controls. All that gets carried forward. And then even things like, these are small examples, but like what paint do you use on boxes so that it lasts the life of the truck? What connectors do you need to use so they don't corrode in the environments? All that is learnings that carry forward. And we've tried to design it where when you want to swap that generator, you carry all those learnings of the other components, and it's just now a new integration of a generator. And actually the software was even designed to easily be able to communicate with new generator sources as well.
Yep. I want to pause and see if there's any last-minute questions from the audience before we wrap up. So as we go out, several years, what does this company look like? You talked again about a powertrain. What's the core IP? What does this company look like in 5-10 years?
Yeah, so the goal is to really shift into being a tier one supplier to the OEMs. So right now, one of the things is we're selling full trucks, but we want to just be selling, and we're buying the trucks from Peterbilt, but we want to shift into just being the powertrain provider, go forward, and growing scale and having this portfolio laid out. And then from a stationary or from a Carno standpoint, have stationary generators deployed, have that proven, and then in a few years from now, starting to pull Carno over to being a vehicle generator as well. So there's really two different parts of the company. There's powertrain and stationary power and generation of electricity, and then as we go forward, start coupling those together.
And with the last 30 seconds, so you do feel confident about the cash burn, but what how does that look? When would you have to raise capital, or do you think you can reach just it naturally with your, as you ramp the business?
So where we're at right now is definitely don't need to raise in 23. We could get through even 24 and into 25 before we would need to raise again. But one thing John, our CFO, has shared is we want to be opportunistic on a raise, right? So having that long run rate ahead of us, but also now starting to look at when we would need to raise again, we'll look to be as opportune as possible as we go forward. But the good news is we're not in a position where we have to raise right now.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, it's always a pleasure to hear your insights. So thanks for supporting the conference, and we'll look forward to following the progress. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.